Welcome back. How long have you been watching my channel? Let me know below.
You know those family weddings where everyone shows up dressed to impress and armed with enough fake smiles to power a small city, pretending that all the old grudges and simmering resentments have somehow evaporated just because there's an open bar and a dance floor begging for awkward Andy moves. But deep down, the air crackles with the kind of tension that makes you wonder if the cake cutting will turn into a full-blown brawl before dessert even hits the tables. That was exactly the scene at my cousin Emily's wedding reception last summer in a swanky Chicago hotel ballroom. The type of place with glittering chandeliers dangling like diamonds from the ceiling and waiters weaving through the crowd with trays of champagne flutes that everyone clutched a little too tightly as if the bubbles could wash away years of family dysfunction. I had arrived feeling cautiously optimistic, slipping into my tailored navy blue dress that flattered my figure without trying too hard, figuring I would mingle just enough to show face, offer a heartfelt toast to the happy couple, and then slip out early to avoid the inevitable barrage of questions from relatives about why a successful 45-year-old woman like me was still pouring all her energy into building her real estate development firm instead of settling down with a nice guy and starting the family they all assumed I secretly craved. Little did I know that my mother, Evelyn, with her unerring talent for turning any joyful occasion into a stage for her personal dramas, had been plotting something far more explosive, roping in my younger sister Lisa, the perpetual favorite who had spent her life coasting on charm and handouts while I clawed my way up from nothing, as her unwitting, or perhaps all too willing, accomplice in what was about to unfold. The evening had been progressing smoothly at first, with the band crooning smooth jazz standards that filled the room with a warm, nostalgic glow, laughter bubbling up from clusters of guests sharing stories about Emily's journey from small-town girl to corporate lawyer, and plates of perfectly seared prime rib and delicate wedding cake making their rounds as the scent of fresh flowers mingled with the faint tang of spilled wine. I was deep in conversation with Aunt Marlene, swapping tales about the latest housing market surges in the suburbs and how they reminded us of the old neighborhood where we grew up, when the DJ suddenly interrupted the music to announce a special toast from none other than Evelyn Thompson, my mom, who had somehow convinced him to hand over the microphone as if she were the event's unofficial MC. She ascended the small platform in her shimmering sequined gown that caught the light like a disco ball from the 70s, her posture radiating that authoritative poise she had perfected over decades of bending situations to her will, and launched into a speech that started innocently enough with praise for Emily's big day and the enduring bonds of family that supposedly held us all together through thick and thin. But then, as the room quieted and all eyes turned her way, she pivoted sharply toward me, her voice amplifying through the speakers with a clarity that made every word land like a hammer on an anvil, declaring to the entire assembly of 200 friends and relatives that I, Sarah, had achieved such remarkable success with my luxurious penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, a crowning jewel of my career that I had earned through sleepless nights negotiating deals and navigating economic downturns, and it was high time I shared that prosperity by signing it over to Lisa, because after all, she was the one who truly needed it now, what with her recent messy divorce leaving her scrambling for stability and a fresh start in a city that chewed up dreamers like her without mercy. The ballroom plunged into a stunned hush, forks suspended midway to mouths and glasses, clinking awkwardly as people exchanged wide-eyed glances. Because nothing says celebration like publicly demanding your daughter hand over her most prized possession to bail out her siblings' chronic string of poor choices, turning what should have been a night of unity into a spectacle of entitlement that exposed the rotten core of our family dynamics for all to see. Heat flooded my face not from shame but from that deep-seated fury I had buried for years, the kind that stems from always being positioned as the strong, selfless one who fixes everyone else's problems while getting slapped figuratively and, as it turned out, literally, with ingratitude in return, and I rose from my seat with deliberate slowness, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife through silk as I responded that this wasn't some communal potluck where my hard-won accomplishments could be divvied up on a whim that I had poured every ounce of my soul into creating that penthouse as a symbol of my independence after decades of watching Lisa flit from one failed venture to another without consequence. Mom's eyes narrowed in that familiar way, the one that signaled she wasn't about to let logic or fairness derail her narrative, and she stormed across the polished floor, microphone still gripped tightly in her fist, until she was right in front of me. Her hand swinging out in a sharp arc that connected with my cheek with a resounding crack that echoed off the walls louder than the band ever could, sending a sharp sting radiating across my skin and leaving the entire room frozen in collective shock, whispers dying on lips as the music scratched to a halt. I didn't cry out or recoil in dramatic fashion, though the pain throbbed hot and insistent, pulsing in time with my heartbeat as I touched the reddening mark with tentative fingers. Instead, meeting her gaze with a steady calm that I had cultivated through years of therapy and self-reflection to mask the storm raging inside. The disbelief that she would stoop so low in public just to enforce her warped sense of family obligation. Without another word, I turned on my heel and walked out of the ballroom, my steps measured and unhurried across the cool marble lobby floor, the click of my heels the only sound breaking the heavy silence that had swallowed the party whole, leaving behind a wake of uncomfortable murmurs and averted eyes as guests grappled with the raw display of dysfunction they had just witnessed. Exactly 60 minutes later, as I sat in my parked car a block away, pressing a chilled water bottle against my swelling cheek and contemplating whether this was the final straw that would sever the frayed ties binding me to a family that had never truly valued me, the hotel's grand doors burst open once more, and a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit emerged carrying a thick leather portfolio bulging with documents, striding purposefully back into the reception hall where the party had tentatively resumed. Mom intercepted him near the entrance, her face a mask of imperious demand as she snatched the papers from his grasp, flipping them open with frantic urgency, and then, as her eyes scanned the dense lines of text, she unleashed a scream that pierced the night air even through my closed windows, a raw, guttural wail blending outrage and terror that sent a chill racing down my spine, making me wonder just what legal thunderbolt I had unknowingly, or perhaps intuitively, unleashed upon them all, hinting at revelations that could unravel the very foundations of everything we had ever pretended to hold dear. As the raw edge of Mom's scream lingered in the air like an unwelcome echo that refused to fade even after I pulled away from the hotel curb with my hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, my thoughts inevitably spiraled backward through the tangled web of our family history, revisiting those formative years in our cramped South Side bungalow where the uneven distribution of affection and resources had first planted the seeds of resentment that now bloomed into full-blown thorns, capable of drawing blood at the slightest provocation. Growing up as the older daughter in a household strained by Dad's long hours at the factory and Mom's endless cycle of part-time jobs that never quite covered the bills, I had quickly learned to become the fixer, the one who mended broken toys for Lisa, covered for her skipped chores, and even forged notes to school when she overslept after staying up late watching reruns, all while Mom lavished praise on her baby girl for the simplest things like drawing a picture or flashing a dimpled smile that could melt the iciest moods. It wasn't as if Mom was overtly malicious in her favoritism. She would frame it as protecting the more fragile one, the pretty and delicate Lisa who needed nurturing to flourish, whereas I, with my sturdy build and no-nonsense attitude, was expected to tough it out like Dad did, forging my own path without the luxury of a safety net or an encouraging word beyond the occasional pat on the back for bringing home straight A's that somehow never earned the same celebratory ice cream runs as Lisa's participation trophies from soccer leagues she quit halfway through. Those patterns only intensified after Dad's sudden heart attack claimed him 10 years ago, leaving behind a modest life insurance policy that Mom treated like her personal slush fund for family emergencies, which inevitably meant funneling the bulk toward Lisa's half-hearted attempts at higher education and her string of boyfriends who promised the world but delivered little more than headaches and unpaid utility bills. I remembered the day she handed me a check for $200 from that payout, calling it my share while Lisa got $5,000 to start a community college program that she abandoned after one semester for a job at a coffee shop that paid peanuts and required constant bailouts when tips ran dry. And though I used my portion wisely to cover the first month's rent on my tiny studio apartment after landing my entry-level job at a real estate agency, the sting of being undervalued festered, quietly fueling my determination to build something unbreakable on my own terms without ever leaning on the family that had conditioned me to give endlessly without reciprocity. By the time I had worked my way up to founding my own development firm, specializing in high-rise conversions that turned forgotten warehouses into sought-after urban lofts, I had mastered the art of emotional detachment, attending holidays with polite smiles and minimal engagement, yet the undercurrent of expectation never fully receded, manifesting in subtle digs about how successful people like me should remember their roots by helping those less fortunate. Code for propping up Lisa's latest scheme or covering Mom's mounting medical copays from her arthritis treatments. The morning after the wedding fiasco dawned gray and drizzly, mirroring the heaviness in my chest as I arrived at my office overlooking the bustling Loop District, where the skyline stretched out like a testament to ambition realized through grit and sleepless strategy sessions, only to find my inbox flooded with concerned messages from cousins and distant aunts dissecting the drama in hushed tones that barely masked their gossip-fueled curiosity. I powered through a morning meeting on a potential condo project, channeling the adrenaline from the slap into sharp negotiations that secured a favorable zoning variance. But my focus shattered when the receptionist buzzed to announce that Evelyn Thompson was in the lobby demanding to see me immediately, her tone brooking no delays, as if the building itself owed her immediate access to her ungrateful daughter. Reluctantly, I had her shown into my corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and sleek modern desk, where Mom entered like a whirlwind, her eyes red-rimmed from what I assumed was a night of righteous indignation mixed with the remnants of cheap champagne, clutching that mysterious folder of papers under one arm as if it were a shield against the accusations she knew were coming. She launched into a tirade without preamble, accusing me of humiliating the entire family by walking out and turning a beautiful event into tabloid fodder that would have everyone whispering about the Thompsons' dirty laundry for months. All while painting Lisa as the true victim in this scenario, a struggling single woman fresh off a divorce, who deserved a leg up from her more fortunate sibling rather than public scorn for her vulnerabilities. I let her words wash over me at first, leaning back in my chair with the calm facade I had perfected over years of boardroom battles. But as she ramped up the guilt-tripping with tales of Lisa's hardships and how I had always been the strong one destined to carry the load, a spark of that old fire ignited, prompting me to exact a small but satisfying measure of revenge by reaching into my lower desk drawer and retrieving the worn leather-bound photo album that chronicled our childhood in meticulous detail, flipping it open to the spread of Lisa's extravagant Sweet 16 bash complete with a rented hall, live DJ, and a 3-tiered cake that must have cost a small fortune at the time. With a wry chuckle that carried the weight of unspoken ironies, I slid the album across the desk toward her, pointing to the contrasting image on the facing page of my own 16th birthday celebrated with a store-bought sheet cake and paper plates in our backyard because, as she had explained back then, budgets were tight after splurging on the favorite, and remarked how that right there encapsulated the legacy she had so carefully cultivated, one where the reliable daughter scraped by on leftovers while the cherished one feasted on every opportunity. But now, armed with my own financial independence and a network of advisors who had helped me amass a portfolio far beyond that penthouse, I was closing the bank on further deposits into their endless account of entitlement. Mom's face flushed a deep crimson, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water as she stammered defenses about tough choices and changing times, insisting that the papers in her folder proved I owed more to the family than I realized. Perhaps some forgotten clause from Dad's will that tied our fortunes together in ways I had never imagined. She gathered her things with jerky movements, muttering about talking to Lisa to sort this out, and as she retreated down the hallway toward the elevators, I couldn't resist following at a discreet distance, only to overhear her voice drop into a hushed, Urgent conversation on her cell phone, confiding to my sister about the need to protect their share of something unspecified before I could dig too deep and ruin everything they had worked so hard to safeguard, her words laced with a conspiratorial edge that hinted at layers of deception far deeper than just sibling rivalry or a simple inheritance squabble, leaving me frozen in place with a chill of foreboding as I pondered what hidden family fortune or secret pact they were so desperate to shield from my prying eyes. With the shadowy implications of Mom's overheard phone call still swirling in my mind like fog rolling off the lake on a crisp autumn morning, refusing to dissipate no matter how many times I replayed the conversation in my head during the drive home that evening, I forced myself to compartmentalize the budding paranoia and dive headfirst into the demands of my workday the following week, where the relentless pace of client meetings and site inspections served as a welcome distraction from the family vortex threatening to pull me under once again. My real estate firm had been riding a wave of success with a portfolio of upscale conversions that transformed derelict industrial spaces into vibrant live-work lofts appealing to young professionals craving that authentic urban edge. And I had just wrapped up negotiations on a promising lakeside condominium project that promised to bolster our reputation even further, yet the undercurrents of personal fallout began seeping into my professional world in ways I hadn't anticipated, starting with an unexpected email from a potential investor who turned out to be connected to Lisa's ex-husband through some convoluted business acquaintance, inquiring delicately about my willingness to co-sign on a loan for what he vaguely described as a family-supported venture to help her get back on her feet after the divorce. The message landed in my inbox like a grenade disguised as a polite request, laced with assumptions that my success automatically translated into an obligation to underwrite my sister's perpetual string of misfortunes. And as I sat in my office staring at the screen with a growing knot of irritation tightening in my stomach, it dawned on me that this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern where Lisa's chaotic life had started bleeding into my carefully curated network, potentially jeopardizing deals if word spread that the Thompsons were a house of cards one bad decision away from collapse. Determined not to let their mess tarnish my hard-earned credibility, I arranged a discreet coffee meeting with the investor the next afternoon at a bustling cafe near the financial district, the kind of spot where power lunches unfolded amid the aroma of fresh espresso and the hum of ambitious conversations. Positioning myself across from him in a booth with my posture straight and my expression one of composed professionalism as I steered the discussion away from personal entanglements and toward the merits of the condo project instead. He was affable enough at first, a middle-aged guy in a sharp suit who reminisced about Chicago's evolving skyline, much like I did with clients to build rapport, but as the small talk waned, he broached the loan topic with a hesitant chuckle, explaining how Lisa had reached out through mutual contacts claiming I would vouch for her because we were family and blood was thicker than any fine print, which prompted me to lean in with a measured smile and counter that while family ties ran deep, my endorsements were reserved for ventures with solid projections rather than emotional appeals, subtly shifting the narrative to protect my boundaries without burning bridges outright. That's when he dropped the twist that turned my coffee bitter in my mouth, confiding off the record that Lisa's situation was far graver than a simple post-divorce slump. She had racked up tens of thousands in credit card debt fueled by a hidden gambling habit picked up during lonely nights at local casinos, the kind of vice that started as harmless entertainment but snowballed into a desperate scramble for quick fixes, with creditors now circling like vultures and even dragging our family name into collection calls that painted an unflattering picture of instability. The revelation hit me with the force of a cold splash, confirming my suspicions that Mom's dramatic mic grab at the wedding hadn't been a spontaneous outburst of maternal bias, but a calculated desperation move to leverage my assets as a lifeline for debts they had kept buried under layers of denial and deflection. And as I wrapped up the meeting with assurances that the condo deal stood on its own merits, a sly idea for revenge bubbled up from that well of long-simmered frustration, leading me to forward the anonymized essence of the investor's email, minus any identifying details. To our sprawling family group chat later that evening with a pointed yet humorous caption that read something along the lines of how it seemed Lisa's needs were accruing interest faster than a high-yield savings account, and perhaps it was time for the rest of us to consider. This less of family obligation and more a cautionary tale about diversifying one's portfolio away from risky bets. The chat exploded almost immediately with a flurry of replies from cousins expressing shock and aunts offering sympathetic platitudes, but Mom's response came through as a furious voice message that I played on speaker in my empty penthouse, her voice crackling with indignation as she accused me of airing private matters like some vindictive soap opera villain and demanded I delete the message before it caused irreparable damage to Lisa's fragile recovery. We ended up on a heated phone call that stretched into the night, her defending the gambling as a temporary lapse brought on by stress, while I laid out the pattern of sacrifices I had made over the years. From dipping into my own savings to cover Lisa's tuition dropout fees to quietly paying off a car repossession so Mom wouldn't have to face the embarrassment, only to be met with her insistence that those were acts of love, not debts to be tallied, and that the papers from the reception held the key to why I should be grateful rather than resentful, perhaps. Some overlooked provision in Dad's estate that bound us all in ways I had foolishly ignored. Her vague allusions to those documents hung in the air like smoke after a fire, teasing at unresolved threads from our past that could either vindicate her favoritism or expose it as the self-serving manipulation it truly was. And as we ended the call with her huffing about needing space to consult the family lawyer, I recalled glimpsing that faded envelope peeking from her purse during the wedding chaos. An innocuous detail at the time, but now looming large as a potential Pandora's box of financial discrepancies or hidden clauses that might explain why she was so frantic to claim my penthouse before the full truth came crashing down on all of us. Mom's cryptic references to the papers and that elusive envelope from her purse continued to haunt my thoughts like a persistent shadow that lengthened with every passing hour, refusing to let me focus fully on the stack of blueprints and contracts piling up on my desk as the workweek dragged on. So I decided it was time to unearth the roots of this tangled mess by reaching out to the one family member who had always seen through the illusions we others clung to, my Uncle Ray, Dad's younger brother who had distanced himself years ago after clashing with Mom over the handling of the funeral arrangements and what he perceived as her overreach into family affairs. Ray had always been the outlier in our clan, a grizzled mechanic with grease-stained hands and a no-nonsense demeanor honed from decades fixing trucks in a South Side garage. The kind of man who preferred straight talk over sugar-coated pleasantries and had once confided in me during a rare holiday visit that Mom's favoritism toward Lisa wasn't just parental bias, but a calculated way to control the narrative of Dad's legacy, ensuring that any resources flowed through her hands to maintain the power dynamic she thrived on. I hadn't spoken to him much since Dad's death, our interactions limited to the occasional holiday card or a quick call on his birthday, but something in his past warnings resonated now more than ever, prompting me to dial his number one rainy afternoon while staring out at the gray expanse of the city from my office window, the drops streaking the glass like tears unshed for the family secrets we had all buried under layers of denial and routine. He agreed to meet without hesitation, his voice gravelly over the line as he suggested the same old diner on the edge of town where he took his coffee black and his stories unfiltered. A relic of a place with checkered floors worn smooth by generations of locals and booths that sagged comfortably under the weight of shared confidences. So I drove out there the next day navigating through rush-hour traffic that crawled like a reluctant confession, arriving to find him already seated with a steaming mug in hand and a folder of yellow documents spread out before him like artifacts from a forgotten excavation. Over plates of greasy eggs and hash browns that soaked up the tension hanging between us, Ray laid it all bare in his straightforward way, confirming the suspicions that had been gnawing at me since the wedding slap. Explaining that Dad hadn't left just a meager insurance payout as Mom had always claimed, but a substantial trust fund stemming from savvy property investments he had made quietly during his factory days, flipping a few undervalued lots in the suburbs before the market boomed and turning them into a nest egg meant to secure futures for all three of us kids. with equal shares outlined in letters from the family lawyer that Ray had kept copies of because he never fully trusted the way Mom had taken charge of the estate administration. According to those faded pages, which he slid across the table for me to pore over with a mix of disbelief and vindication, Mom had gradually siphoned portions of the principal toward Lisa's endless needs, college funds that vanished into thin air, bailouts for bad relationships, even cosmetic procedures to keep up appearances, while conveniently deeming me too self-sufficient to require my portion, doling it out in trickles that barely covered my early rent payments, and leaving the bulk under her control to perpetuate the cycle of dependency that kept Lisa tethered and me resentful. The pieces clicked into place with a clarity that both empowered and exhausted me, illuminating why Mom's desperation at the reception had escalated to physical confrontation. Her fear that my rising success with the Penthouse and firm might prompt me to audit the accounts and expose the discrepancies that could strip her of the financial leverage she had wielded like a scepter for over a decade. And as Ray warned me to tread carefully, because family loyalties ran deep even among the wronged, I felt a surge of resolve mixed with that familiar twinge of doubt about whether dragging this into the open would heal old wounds or simply reopen them with sharper edges. Armed with this ammunition, I crafted my next act of revenge with the precision of a developer plotting a high-stakes renovation. Composing a seemingly innocuous email to the family lawyer under the guise of routine estate planning inquiries for my own portfolio, casually requesting a review of Dad's original will and any associated trusts to ensure everything was up to date in light of recent life changes, knowing full well that protocol would compel him to carbon copy the entire family on the response, which arrived the next morning in a detailed summary that highlighted the original equal allocations without directly accusing anyone of mismanagement, but letting the implications simmer like a pot left too long on the stove. Lisa called me in a frenzy shortly after, her voice trembling over the line as she begged for a private meeting at a neutral coffee shop downtown, insisting that none of this was her fault, but Mom's overprotectiveness gone awry. And though part of me ached at the vulnerability in her tone, the little sister I had once shielded from playground bullies now pleading like a cornered animal, I couldn't ignore the slip she made midway through her explanations about how they had always counted on my inherent generosity to bridge any gaps in the trust, a phrase that reeked of entitlement and nearly made me laugh out loud at the absurdity of it all. I responded with a lighthearted yet pointed text later that evening, quipping that if generosity were an investment, I'd have declared bankruptcy seasons ago from all the unreturned dividends. A jab that landed with enough humor to deflect outright hostility while underscoring the imbalance. But as the days wore on toward the family dinner Mom had orchestrated under the pretense of mending fences and clearing the air once and for all, the internal conflict churned within me, tempting me to extend an olive branch to Lisa despite the betrayals, because who among us hasn't stumbled in the pursuit of stability, even if her stumbles had consistently landed on my shoulders to cushion the fall? Uncle Ray's final cautionary note echoed in my mind as I pulled up to the old family home that evening, the porch light flickering like a hesitant beacon amid the gathering dusk, advising me that the real unraveling was just beginning and to brace for the fallout. A sentiment that proved prescient when I stepped through the door into the tense atmosphere of forced civility, only to spot that same stern-faced man from the reception lingering just outside with another bulging stack of papers in his briefcase. His arrival timed perfectly as Mom flung open the inner door with a face pale as fresh snow, snatching the documents from him while Lisa peered over her shoulder in wide-eyed alarm, the air thickening with unspoken dread as whatever cataclysmic truth those pages held poised to erupt and redefine the fragile bonds we had all pretended were unbreakable. The man on the porch stood there unmoved by the sudden rush of activity inside the old family home, his briefcase snapping open with a crisp click that cut through the murmurs like a judge's gavel signaling the start of proceedings no one had anticipated, as Mom, her face already etched with lines of preemptive worry, reached out with trembling fingers to accept the sheaf of documents he extended, her eyes flicking toward me across the crowded living room where aunts and uncles shifted uncomfortably on the sagging couch, and Lisa hovered at the edge of the group like a shadow unsure of its shape. We had all gathered under the guise of reconciliation, the air thick with the scent of Mom's overcooked pot roast and the forced cheer of small talk about neighborhood changes and Emily's honeymoon photos. But now the pretense shattered as the lawyer. For that's who he was, the firm's top estate specialist I had quietly retained through Uncle Ray's connections, cleared his throat and began outlining the contents in a measured tone that brooked no interruptions. Starting with the comprehensive audit of Dad's trust fund that had uncovered not just the siphon funds, but a deliberate pattern of exclusion designed to favor one child over the others in ways that bordered on fiduciary negligence. The papers detailed every withdrawal Mom had authorized over the years, from Lisa's tuition payments that evaporated into parties and dropouts to the loans for her ex-husband's failed ventures, totaling well over $100,000 that should have been my rightful share, divided equally as per Dad's original intent. And as the numbers scrolled down the page in stark black ink, I watched Mom's composure crack, her free hand clutching the back of a chair for support while Lisa's face drained of color, her whispered denials falling on ears too stunned to respond. But the real twist, the one that hung in the air like a thunderclap waiting to break, came midway through the lawyer's recitation when he referenced a sealed addendum to Dad's will, unearthed during the deep dive into archival records, revealing that Lisa wasn't the full sibling we had all assumed, but the product of a brief affair Mom had during one of Dad's extended work trips, a secret he had discovered late in life and chosen to bury out of love for the family unit, stipulating in private correspondence that any inheritance for her be conditional on transparency to prevent further deceptions that could fracture the bonds he held dear. The room erupted into a cacophony of gasps and overlapping questions, Uncle Ray nodding grimly from his corner as if to confirm the bombshell's authenticity, while I stood there absorbing the revelation with a mix of sorrow and ironic relief, realizing that the favoritism wasn't just bias, but a guilty overcompensation to atone for the lie that had defined our lives, making Lisa's endless needs a perpetual penance Mom paid from Dad's hard-earned legacy rather than her own conscience. Mom's scream finally tore free then, a visceral howl that rattled the windows and sent a nearby vase teetering on the mantel, her body collapsing into the chair as she flung the papers to the floor in a flurry of fluttering pages, accusing me of orchestrating this destruction out of spite, of hiring mercenaries to dismantle the very foundation she had built to protect us all from the ugliness of truth. But in that moment, my revenge crystallized not in triumph, but in a quiet assertion of boundaries long overdue, as I knelt to gather the scattered documents and handed them back to the lawyer with a steady gaze, remarking with a wry twist of humor that if family secrets were real estate, we'd all be sitting on prime waterfront property riddled with liens and easements no one bothered to disclose. The fallout unfolded in slow motion over the ensuing hours, with Lisa retreating to the kitchen in tears, mumbling apologies that tangled between pleas for forgiveness and defenses of her ignorance, while relatives divided into camps of sympathy and condemnation, some pulling me aside to whisper support for finally calling out the imbalance, and others shooting accusatory glances, as if my pursuit of justice had poisoned the well we all drank from. Mom, recovering enough to launch into a rambling defense laced with what a load of convoluted nonsense this all was, demanded I renounce the claim to the trust's remaining assets, insisting that blood, however diluted, deserved loyalty over legal technicalities, but I held firm, explaining through the haze of exhaustion that this wasn't about stripping them bare, but reclaiming what Dad intended as a level playing field, a chance for me to stop being the perpetual donor in a family economy rigged against fairness. As the evening dissolved into awkward goodbyes and the lawyer departed with assurances of impending court filings to redistribute the funds equitably, I lingered on the porch alone, the cool night air carrying the distant hum of city traffic that reminded me of the independence I had forged beyond these walls, pondering whether this reckoning would forge stronger ties through honesty or sever them irreparably, leaving me to wonder if the peace I sought in justice was just another illusion in a lineage built on half-truths. And if forgiving the unforgivable might one day bridge the chasm or simply widen it into an abyss from which no one returns unchanged.